Okay, it being 6:30, I will call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, October 11th, and we are here in the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring? Dr. Lakuta? Here. Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Pankratz?
Present.
Ms. Flanagan?
Present. The board does have a quorum. I will hold up the proof of notice so that everyone knows that this meeting has been properly noticed. And then before we move on to approval of the agenda, I just wanted to turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom, who's going to say a few words for us tonight.
Excuse me, I just want to make sure it's on. It's in? We're good? So the board meeting tonight is the first board meeting we've had since the very tragic loss of our student, Carolina Shank. And so I just wanted to say a few words about Carolina before we begin our meeting tonight. She was a 6th grade student at Forest Edge, and she had spent her K-4 years at Netherwood, so many members of our staff knew her. It was through meetings with teachers and student services and Miss Majeski from Forest Edge that I heard a lot of wonderful things about who she was as a person. However, it was at her funeral service, I think, where I really started to get an understanding of what a truly amazing young person Carolina was. Members of her family stood up and spoke and showed more courage and grace than I think most people could under the circumstances. And they spoke about how mature she was and yet silly at the same time, how poised she was and yet her laughter and her jokes, and her family described her as their bright light. So we know that she had many friends and she touched the lives of many people, and I'm very grateful that our staff came together with so much love and empathy and support for her friends and their families and her classmates, and for one another, and also to the greatest extent possible for her family, because they obviously are facing the worst thing that any family can face. And our hearts go out to them, and we really will cherish the memory of their daughter. And I just wanted to take a few moments at the beginning to talk about that and to thank everybody for all the support that they've provided as a community.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. And on behalf of the Board of Directors, we want to send our condolences to the family, too, and thank all of our staff that has come together and our student services folks, too. So thank you. Okay, tonight we have the consent calendar, and then we have information items as usual, and then we have a few action items to take on tonight, and then we'll have committee reports and then finish up with our information items from Dr. Bergstrom. So I will entertain, and then the board will go into closed session after the meeting tonight. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries. We do have an agenda. Next up is agenda item A, which is consent calendar. We have minutes of previous meetings and normal approval of payments and treasurer's report. We do also have a staff resignation. Nicolette Timberlake is retiring effective November 1st, and she has been with our district for 20 years. So we want to send our thanks to her and best wishes to her in retirement. So thank you, Nicolette. We also do have a pretty hefty list of donations, so I do want to read those tonight and thank all of these organizations and individuals for donating to our school district. $1,500 for the Brooklyn Elementary Green and Healthy from Healthy Classrooms Foundation, $250 for the Interact Club from the Oregon Rotary Foundation, $3,000 for a picnic table from Drs. Dennis and Linda Farrar, $2,500 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad from the Optimist Club of Oregon Brooklyn, $150 for the Wellness Group from Pizza Pit, $400 for the Wellness Group from Audio Contractors, $500 for the Splash Pad Bench from the Girl Scouts of America Troop 7720, $2,246 for 4 single jet streams for the Splash Pad from Liberty Towing Service, LLC, $3,000 for the Splash Pad from Quick Trip, $500 for the Splash Pad from Kathleen Peterson, $13,100 for the OMS and RCI band programs from Oregon Band Boosters, $1,000 for the Splash Pad from Dorothy Faust, $800 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad from the Optimist Club of Oregon Brooklyn, and then Panther T-shirts for elementary students in need of Oregon Panther attire for homecoming from an anonymous donor. So we sincerely appreciate all those individuals and organizations that give to our students in the Oregon School District. Thank you so much. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll move to approve. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Dr. Lakuda?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Next is agenda item B, information items. First is public comment. And again, per district policy 18005, it provides an opportunity for the public to address the board. We value the public comment period and feedback from our stakeholders. So to comply with the open meetings law and to ensure consistency, public comment will have the following parameters. Each person, when called up, will give their name and address and any group they represent. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to make their comments. The board will not comment after each speaker and will reserve discussion to any items on the agenda, and speakers are welcome to stay for the meeting. And then next steps following public comment may include referral to the appropriate administrator for follow-up with the speaker or placement of the matter on a future board agenda. We do have one person registered for public comment, so Richard Clark, if you want to come up. You can turn on the microphone, and then the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Richard Clark, and I live at 123 Marcy Drive in Brooklyn. And I do not represent any group.
Okay.
All right, so, cool. So I'm speaking to you today to inform you that, the school board, that I believe a district policy, or a lack thereof, is discriminating against students, or at least treating a group of students differently, and therefore is in violation of Wisconsin statute 118.13. So, OHS students were not allowed to invite a guest to participate in the homecoming dance this past Saturday. This decision resulted in students who date outside of OHS being treated differently solely based on who they choose to date. Other districts in Dane County have a guest approval process, but OHS does not. So to resolve this issue, I suggest that Principal Pliner, Dr. Bergstrom, and I work on a process modeled after other districts that would allow OHS students to have the option to bring a non-OHS student to district events that are not open to the public. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to providing updates at future meetings.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Dr. Bergstrom, we will look forward to hearing from you after that. OEA report is B2. Nate, I believe you are here to make a statement on behalf of the OEA.
There we go. All right, so I'm Nathan Johnson. I am spokesperson for the Oregon Education Association, and I'm here tonight to provide a statement from the OEA board. The Oregon Education Association Board of Directors, as the duly elected representatives of the teachers at Oregon School District, remains committed to creating a learning environment that prioritizes student health and safety while delivering an optimal educational experience to our learners. To this end, the Oregon Education Association seeks to leverage every avenue possible to protect those who are medically vulnerable in our community and our younger students who are not yet eligible for vaccination. One of those avenues would be continuing to increase vaccination amongst Oregon School District staff. The staff who work with students on a daily basis have the responsibility to do everything in their power to protect the students in their care, as well as the families of those students who may be indirectly impacted as well. While our staff vaccination rate is already relatively high, the more staff who are vaccinated, the better we can limit the spread of COVID-19. Increased vaccination amongst those who work with youth in our community who are not district employees would also serve to protect our entire school community, and we urge those who are unvaccinated in the community to consider seeking vaccination. Beyond limiting the spread of the virus, once staff are vaccinated, they no longer need to be quarantined due to close contacts. Fewer staff quarantines would lead to more educational consistency and improved academic outcomes for both staff and students. Maximizing the number of Oregon School District staff who are vaccinated remains one of the most important tools available to maximize health and minimize educational disruptions. We recognize that the district is already working to encourage staff vaccinations, and the OEA urges the district to continue and is eager to support this proactive work to encourage and facilitate undecided staff to get vaccinated against COVID-19.
Thank you, Nate. All right, we do not have a student report tonight, so moving on to C, action items. Action item 1 is discussion and possible action on the levy management strategy. So I believe I will turn that over to Mr. Wyland.
Thank you. Mr. Eric Cass is going to also join us at the table, and he's going to walk through some of the scenarios that he and I worked on last week to kind of provide some framework for our discussions this evening. As we've talked about the last couple meetings, the idea here is to kind of manage what the levy is going to be at this year. Based on your discussion tonight, we will then come up and implement that strategy and put it into the paperwork for the original budget, which would come before you on the October 25th board meeting. It's important to mention that the dollar amount is not necessarily what we're looking for tonight. It's more the strategy, because the dollar amount is going to change a little bit based on what our state aid number is. That's the last number in our budget that we don't have right now. We will get that certification by this Friday. Probably will happen actually on Friday. So the strategy is what we're looking for tonight, not necessarily a dollar amount. We'll be able to extrapolate that dollar amount after Friday. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Good evening, and thanks again for the opportunity to kind of come and discuss the three options that Andy and I put together. Kudos to Andy, who, as you probably already know, does a tremendous job on the analysis and kind of pushing the different options. So a lot of work has gone into the three options and thought as well. A couple of data points that maybe weren't in the memo that I think are important to share are the state of Wisconsin overall, on average, saw a 7% increase in property valuations across all of the different lines, whether it be commercial, manufacturing, or everything else. Residential in the state of Wisconsin was the leading indicator at 8%, kind of leading the charge for that 7%. And breaking that down even further into two data points that we talked about last time, and we'll talk about a little bit more here this evening, are 5% of that 7 are wrapped up in market valuation increases, what we call kind of inflationary increases, reassessments, and 2% on average across the state of Wisconsin are due to net new construction. So at 10.39%, clearly above the state average, but I think it's important to understand those statewide averages because there's a lot of inflation and increases in property values across the state of Wisconsin, not just here in Oregon. Andy did a good job of also outlining some of the unique circumstances. I think last time we talked about what are some of the underlying strategies, and we'll get into some of those and how they potentially could impact property taxpayers here in the different municipalities you're looking at. And one of the unique pieces is if you look at the city of Fitchburg, for example, that saw a 27% increase just encapsulated for the portion of the city of Fitchburg within the Oregon School District. That's kind of on the back of their net new construction, which is your leading net new construction across all municipalities at 5.35%. So I use that as an example, and I think Andy did a good job of including that because it is really hard to understand where growth is in different pockets when you don't have an entire municipality. We are at the mercy of the state of Wisconsin and the data that they provide us. So I want to be sure that you understand, and I will highlight that some of these are laden in analysis, and I'll explain some of the analysis as you decide if any of these three options or a hybrid might be best for your approach as you look to finalize your levy. When we're looking at the three options, they're really based off of two data points that we do know. One is what your total levy was last year, as well as what your total mill rate was last year. So in the memo, it talks about $11.19 as your equalized mill rate for last year. We also have a certified levy of just over $31.2 million last year. So those are the kind of two data points that we were working off of, Andy and myself, to kind of figure out what is the opportunity for the three different options. The first one that we looked at, and we tried to lay these out in a form of the most conservative as it relates to the property tax levy, and maybe the most aggressive as it relates to the property tax levy within kind of a continuum to kind of think through. So the first one looked at targeting the lowest net new construction increase, which was the town of Oregon. which their net new construction was 0.2%. So the thought behind this option was increasing the levy by 0.2% over last year, and following that through, if net new construction at its low point was 0.2, in theory, no property taxpayer would be paying more this year than they did last year, because net new construction would eat up that increase of 0.2%. Now, is that going to be individualized? Of course it is, but I think that, again, the idea behind that and the feedback we got last time was increasing the levy a little bit and creating some strategy and some reasoning behind why that 0.2% would be appropriate. The second one is probably the one that we did the most work on and analyzing. The third one was kind of the easiest one, where we targeted the mill rate, and I don't need to talk too much about that because it lifted the levy an appropriate amount to get to the $11.19, which created the most opportunity to do that debt defeasance or create that long-term savings as it relates to your existing debt. The one that we spent the most time on, circling back to number 2, was this hybrid approach, trying to back our way into breaking down your 10.39 to net new construction and to market value increase, or that inflationary factor. It is certainly not a exact science, and we're using weighted averages, looking at all of your different municipalities that you have, the percent that they are for your value assessment, your equalized valuation, what their net new construction was, and we break that net new construction and market value growth down into about 2.75% net new construction weighted average, and the remainder being on that kind of inflationary. And then what we did is we took your levy and we increased that by that 2.75%, which in theory, and it's never going to be exact, that net new construction would consume the 2.75%, and market value growth would not be touched in terms of how the levy would be set for this coming year. Now, this one is kind of that middle ground that Andy and I came up with, but I do want to stress, and not in a way that's trying to scare you into not going this route, is that we don't know where this net new construction is happening. And I said that earlier, again, with Fitchburg being a prime example. Going up 27%, guarantee a lot of the net new construction within Fitchburg is in your boundaries, but I can't sit here and tell you that that is truly the case. And so just knowing that the analysis we feel very good about, and we think that that 2.75 on average is appropriate for a net new construction, the way that we backed into it, but it's not going to be unique between, you know, the village of Oregon and the city of Fitchburg and everywhere else. Your mill rate will be equalized, but where the net new construction falls, you may have some people that are paying a little bit more and some paying a little bit less, depending upon kind of where the things fall throughout that assessment and the equalized valuation. So those are the 3 options that we, like I said, put together for you to consider, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So what we'll do is we'll go around the room, but Troy, I want to start with you. You're our treasurer, and you're kind of the lead on this, so go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yes, so I don't know that I have a lot of questions, Eric, but I guess kind of diving into an area that you covered. You mentioned like Town of Oregon, lower net new construction, obviously compared to Fitchburg. So if we were to kind of focus in on strategy number 2, is it expected that a Town of Oregon resident might see a little bit of an increase in property taxes, where City of Fitchburg resident might see a decrease? Or are we, well, see if you can answer or comment on that question.
It's hard to get into that level, and I know that that's where we wanted to get to last time from the board's perspective, and I fully respect that. But as I sit here, I can't tell you that that's necessarily going to be the case, because there's assessment ratios, there's other underlying factors beyond just net new construction that go into the property valuations that you're assessing a tax against. And so certainly, theoretically, it sounds appropriate and correct that the city of Fitchburg might be paying a little less than, you know, the Town of Oregon in that example, but I can't sit here and tell you that that's always going to be the case, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know that I really have any other questions at this point. I mean, obviously we've talked a lot about this. I really lean towards strategy number 2. I think that kind of accomplishes a lot of the objectives that we're trying to do in balancing out our future and evening things out. So I guess that's kind of where my head is at, is leaning towards strategy number 2 at this point. So I'll defer to any other questions.
Tim, you're next.
The one thing that is noted in the strategy number 1, using the town of Oregon, I happen to live in the town of Oregon, is that it just focuses on the net new construction there. And it's important to understand that the town of Oregon was completely reassessed this year. And so I have neighbors within, literally neighbors, whose assessment has gone up anywhere from 15 to 25%. And so although we focus on the 0.2%, which is new construction, it doesn't touch what has taken place from a reassessment perspective. Do you have any information, for instance, on the town of Oregon, on what the assessed values, the equalized assessed values have done in the town of Oregon outside of new construction?
I do have my computer. I don't know, Andy, if you have the by municipality. I didn't have it printed out with me, but we do know and can look at those increases. Like the town of Blooming Grove went up 39.5%. Guarantee they got reassessed as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their net new construction was 2.18%. So we do know that for all of the municipalities, absolutely. I mean, if you want me to, I can open up my computer and tell you within 2 seconds. But
More than anything, it's just a point I want to make, that although there's not a lot of new construction outside of Fitchburg and the village of Oregon, the other municipalities that we serve, 8 of them, typically in a rural area, those are long-term residents, for lack of a better term. And so oftentimes, assessments don't follow actual values until there's a reassessment that's done. Town of Oregon hasn't been reassessed for, I can't remember the number of years, but it seems to be at least 12 years. And so it's lagging, there's no doubt about it. And so a lot of the people in the town of Oregon have seen a significant change in their equalized value. So as we look at the $1.3 million of defeasement in strategy number 2, if we see a spike in equalized value in those areas that aren't represented by new construction, 8 other municipalities, is it possible that that number will actually go up simply because there's been a revaluation and a significantly higher equalized value that is created?
what number are you asking about going up when you say that?
The equalized value.
Okay.
That's and as a result of that, all else being equal, the mill rate, for instance, being equal, wouldn't there be a significant uptick in dollars that are realized under strategy number 2 if that took place?
Well, I think if I'm understanding the question, which I apologize if I am not, the 1.3 million is really the constant. So
Okay.
the only way that would change based upon Andy's approach and his desire to get feedback would be due to equalization aid changing from a July 1 estimate. And so that happens on October 15th. And if you're projected, I'm going to use round numbers, to get 10 million from the state, you get 9 million. That 1.3 million will shift, like any of the strategies will, equally to that. So in my example, it would go from 1.3 to 300,000. That's the only thing that will cause the net revenue back to the school district to use strategically to pay off debt early is based upon that
Just the state aid.
Just the state aid. That's it.
Okay.
That's really what Andy is looking for, is just an avenue to go down as it relates to, net new construction, the town of Oregon net new construction, or last year's mill rate, or any hybrid approach that you would want to see in between any of those. And at the end of the day, he ultimately will, but we'll of course work with him to help back into what those appropriate numbers are related to that final debt defeasance number.
Andy, I'm going to let you jump in. I think you have some comments here.
So one of the things I wanted to share was we kind of threw the dollar amount. Now, this is a dollar amount that will change, like Eric just said, based on the state aid number. But assuming that we have the right projection at this point and that $1.3 million increase that is option 2, if I put that into the allocation formula, based on the assessed values between each municipality. What's kind of interesting is that even at level 2, the township of Oregon, their amount that they pay the Oregon School District would still be $147,000 less than it was last year. So, yeah, this uses the equalized values between that and says, okay, everybody's equal. The shift of equalized value between the city of Fitchburg, it went up by like over 2% of the assessed value. So it was like 16% of our assessed value. Now it's over 18%. So they're taking on a larger amount. And as Eric says, that's actually this little bit more guess that we're making right now, is because the only thing that makes sense is there's a lot of new construction there. The town of Blooming Grove is actually interesting because it's really, really small in Oregon School District. I can actually go on Access Dane and look at the 15 properties that are part of Oregon School District, and I know exactly which property made up that 39% increase. Actually, 80% of the increase in the assessed value is one property, and it's a commercial property that just developed this last year. So it feels, the more I looked at this data, it feels like most people, unless they got reassessed, unless they bought a new property, I don't know that they're going to feel so much increase here. Now that's a little bit of a risk, and that's why I put what I put in the agenda item, and Eric's also like kind of couching this a little bit, is it's not a perfect science. It is a little bit, it's more perfect in the Village of Oregon because it's all within the Oregon School District. Consequently, by the way, with that strategy 2, the Village of Oregon taxpayers for school tax purposes would pay $53,000 less, if these numbers are true, than what they did last year as a group. So, but like I've shared you with the 2 numbers that are lower. There are numbers that are higher. Obviously, the city of Fitchburg is going to pay $916,000 more than what they paid last year, but they had such a huge increase in assessed value. So that's kind of the ranges that are going on by municipalities. And then it obviously depends on the assessed value practices within those municipalities as to how they raise those monies and send them to us. Does that make any sense?
The only thing that catches my attention is the caveat, unless they've been reassessed.
And so when I say reassessed, I mean they put an addition on. They did something that triggered the assessment process, not necessarily what you're talking about, like a reassessment for the entire town, because that gets a little complicated, probably a little bit further than what we need to dive in today, but there's something called the equalized assessed value, and the state of Wisconsin does that on each municipality to try to keep us even amongst each other. So even though the town of Oregon just recently got reassessed, they kind of get reassessed every year just a different way by the state of Wisconsin. And that assessment ratio that's on your bill shows what that is. And then that goes away or gets pretty close to 1 when they go through the process that they just went through. So even though your property from a local level says it went from $100,000 to $200,000, well, if your assessment ratio was 0.75 or something like that, or let's say it's 0.5, then it doesn't change. Your portion is still the same as it was before. It's just that the number's more accurate. And that's the number on the market rate of market value compared to the assessed value. You can kind of see that on your bill. More information than you guys ever wanted to know about how that tax process worked, but.
I appreciate you explaining that.
Okay, I don't want to leave that, though, if there's some misperceptions here. I want to be very, very clear
Yep.
what was asked and what is, so I think I want you to explain that again so we don't have any misperceptions tonight. In
So,
terms of
sure.
how we got to this, that you just used Town of Oregon, for example, because their net new construction is the lowest in the district.
Right, for
But
strategy
we're
1.
not picking on the Town of Oregon.
No.
So explain it again, please.
Yeah, so, okay. Eric, help me out here. So the 0.2 of new construction, and we can only see that by municipality, and a good portion of the town of Oregon is in Oregon School District, but there is some part that isn't. And when we look at the town of Oregon's total new construction, it's low, it's a 0.2. We don't know where that sits within the Oregon School District. It might all sit in Oregon School District, it might sit in Verona School District, we don't know. But we're using that number as, okay, that's our low amount, because I can almost guarantee, unless you got reassessed, unless you bought a new property, there's no way the town of Oregon is going to be, a resident's going to be paying more in property taxes by this levy. Because quite honest, as I just shared a little bit before, we're asking the town of Oregon as a whole for $147,000 less than what they gave us last year. So something had to happen with your property that probably should have happened years ago, quite honestly, or just was happened because you put a new porch on, or you put a new addition on, or something like that.
I think the other really important point is, as you look at the Oregon School District and what makes up the pie of the taxes that come here, that pie is changing because of all of the growth in Fitchburg. So where it used to be, Village of Oregon was, you know, a higher percentage than Town of Oregon. City of Fitchburg is replacing Town of Oregon in terms of the percentage of taxes that come into the Oregon School District. So I want to make sure people are very clear on that, their pie is changing. And so that's a really important point, kind of sub-point to this.
So in case you're not totally confused, I'm going to confuse you just a little bit more and say that what's interesting about state aid, school finances in the state of Wisconsin is, next year, because of that assessed value, if we are larger, more assessed value came to the Village of the Oregon School District than any other school district, and depending on what happens with the state aid allocation from the state, we might get less state aid because we're richer. So, but that doesn't impact your decision today. It's just something to think about for next year. And because you're managing that levy, you have the option next year to manage that levy and actually have some flexibility in how you manage that levy by doing what we're suggesting here. So for instance, let's say all of a sudden next year we get less state aid than we got this year. If you wanted to back off the levy a little bit to impact that, you would have that choice next year. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, school finance is complex.
Oh, yes.
And so that's why we're having these discussions and having questions, because this is a long-term strategy, because school finance has gotten even more complex based on state aid changes. So that's why we're here, and that's why this is not simple.
Correct.
So Tim, any additional questions? Okay.
So looking at strategy number 2, just by itself, is there any reason why we wouldn't do this?
You always can come up with a reason. You want to provide property tax relief to people. There would be your biggest rationale.
Okay, Anna, you're up.
All right. Great information, great answers, Andy. It's actually been really helpful to hear some of those explanations, and thank you for the good presentation. I guess I do want to just talk a little bit about kind of some of the hard numbers. I mean, we're still talking about, even with this strategy 2, a mill rate that's 77 cents less than what it was in our previous year. So even if we are building in some debt defeasance opportunities for our district, we're still seeing a lower mill rate than we've had. And I understand that may still have an impact on some people's property taxes, but from the sounds of it, we anticipate that to be fairly minimal or limited, depending on an individual's situation. So if we went with the strategy 1, which is kind of the lowest amount of increase, we're talking about a dollar reduction, so 30 cents approximately. And so I guess my personal opinion is I'm leaning towards that strategy 2, which I think does a good job of attempting to minimize any potential increase on the majority of the residents within our district, but giving us a lot more opportunity to reduce some of our debt and give us that flexibility in the what we have available. So I guess I just wanted to make that comment that I think, in all, we're still talking about a lower mill rate than we had this past year. So I think that's good to talk about. That's it. I don't have any other questions.
Thanks, Anna. Heather?
I think some of my questions have been answered. Andy, I think you said this is a one-year decision, right? Okay, so that was one. I just wanted to make sure. The second one was, I see the numbers in each strategy of what we would have for defeasance, but I couldn't remember or quickly garner from Troy's printout what that actually means in terms of, is that the amount that we are saving, or is that the amount that we are?
That's the amount that you would be applying to pay off
Right.
debt early.
And so what does that get us at the end of the day?
We didn't rework all of them,
Okay.
so probably it's going to be that 50 to 80,000, I think I recall, amount
Okay.
annually that would be saved. And then obviously like in 2038 or 39, it would be a lot more
Right.
because you're paying that off
Yep.
early.
Okay, that was helpful. Do you have a sense of so the mill rate in 2020 was 11.19. Do we have a sense of what it was in 2019 or 2018, or just the near historical thing to help me shed some light on that?
I think we reviewed that last time. Do you have the printout? I think I provided a history right there. I think
Oh,
you're
yeah,
looking
here
at
is,
it right there.
Yep, okay.
You can see the history of what the mill rate has been over the
Okay.
last few years.
Yep, and then my last question is, in strategy 3, I know you're gonna hate this, but when we say more actual dollars this year, it's different for everybody, but could you give us some sort of sense of median home price or something that we could understand how more might actually be to an individual or average taxpayer?
When you say as it relates to like the tax bill,
Yeah, it says most likely all taxpayers would pay more actual dollars this year than last year. Yeah,
Sure.
so on their tax bill, do you have any sense of a?
well, again, I don't want to keep saying the same thing, but I will get to a more pointed response. If somebody's home value was $100,000 last year, right, and they were paying $11.19 to the Oregon School District. This year, I think it's safe to say, just using the analysis we did in number 2, that on average, properties went up, that 7-ish%, the difference between net new construction and what's remaining. And so your $107,000 house would then be paying that $11.19. So I'm good at math, but not that good. Whatever the difference is on that $7,000 increase on that $100,000 home example would be kind of that additional property tax that they would be paying. But of course, as we talked about, it's going to be one person going up 20% because
Right.
the reassessment, somebody didn't go up. So it's going to,
Right.
unfortunately, not be equalized in how it's paid out. But on average, that's really what the analysis is showing us.
Okay.
I think another way to answer that might be that, if your appraisal goes up by a certain amount,
Yep.
pretty close, that's, I think, your tax bill might go up by that amount.
Sure. Okay. I'm somewhere on strategy 2+ would be where I would land. I think there's an opportunity to be wise about what we're doing, especially with what we're facing down the road. And so I would be interested in strategy 2 or maybe a slight notch above it. That's it for me. Thanks.
Mary?
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing, but I'd like confirmation or clarification, is that for those individuals who have not put on additions, who have not purchased new homes, the likelihood that their dollar amount would increase is low to non-existent. And we're going to ignore increases in the assessed value. Is that?
I don't think it'll go up by much, as long as they didn't have something that got the assessor's attention, right?
Right.
That just normal type of process that happens every year, they shouldn't increase by much based on what we're seeing. If that, it should be pretty close to the same dollar. That's kind of that's the
Right.
design of what we came up with.
And is that 2 and 3, or is that just?
No, just two.
Just 2, okay,
Three would definitely bring an increase in people, what they paid last year,
okay.
for sure.
All right, yeah, I think my biggest concern is, those community members who are living on a fixed income, who obviously in the last year have not renovated their houses or et cetera. I'd like to make sure that we protect their interests. But yeah, I am in agreement. Strategy 2 seems to make the most sense to me at this point.
Okay, any other additional questions, comments?
Yeah, Krista, I'd like to actually, can we take a moment and do the math so that we can understand on an actual example? Because while $100,000 is lovely for even numbers, it's probably not reflective of what a median home is. And so can we walk through actually what that might look like at strategy 2 and strategy 3 with picking a number that is an average home price where we're, I don't know what that is. Somebody probably knows better than I
So
do.
what is the median home price
Yeah.
in the Oregon School District? Is it,
Right.
let's just
Right,
take
yeah, we're not taking municipalities.
340 or something like that? I mean, that might be high.
That's what I would have picked, something in the mid-threes.
Okay.
Okay.
So then at 340, we're having an increase, we think, of 7%, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
let me
think to get to where you're going, if you take 340,000 and you apply your mill rate of $11.19, that's what somebody paid in 2020. Then using the analysis that we have, we are showing that on average, homes are increasing by 7.65% due to market value growth within the boundaries of the district. So you take that 340, increase it, and then take the mill rate, which I think was $10.42, and apply that to your new home value. You're going to have an estimate of what that median 340 home paid last year versus what they're paying this year. And if I said that too fast, please let me know and I can slow that back down.
And I don't know if it's equal, but the percent reduction of that mill rate is about 6.8% from what it was last year. So if we've seen a 7% increase in property value and approximately 7% decrease in the mill rate, it should equal out, right? I mean, that's the goal. It's supposed to. Right.
Yep. Again, strategy number 2, I think to her point, was the bill should basically be equal.
Historically, before, have we ever done this before? Have we ever done this kind of?
I think actually, I want to say, if you go back far enough, we actually have kept the rate the same. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it's been a few years. I mean, it's been probably
Okay.
a decade. But we have done this when we've had not necessarily a defeasement. We might have had a defeasement real early on when I got here, but we are actually doing some callable notes,
Yep.
which is the same concept. It's actually a little simpler than what we're doing here.
Okay. All right, that's helpful.
So then to Heather's earlier point, if we were to do a 2+, I think that's where you were going.
I was.
I mean, obviously, I think I hear a fair amount of comfort in the room with strategy 2, but yeah, I wonder how long it would take to get a 2+.
As far as a strategy, it took a little while to figure out what this was. The problem is, I mean, you could say, add a dollar amount onto the strategy or add a percentage onto the strategy. For us to come up with a rationale is harder. We at one point were talking about CPI, but right now CPI is also a little out of control. So I'm not sure that that's what we're seeking. So because the numbers will change a little bit, not exactly sure how much. But if you can give us the strategy, we can still try to implement something that should still have the same impact as what we're talking about today. Eric, help me out.
I mean, it depends on what your level of comfort is, because I think strategy 2, again, to repeat myself, was built around what I think Andy and I were hearing last time, is give us a strategy that you feel comfortable isn't going to impact the average property owner in the school district, right? And that's really what that is. Now, if you want to do more than that, we absolutely can do that. I mean, $3 billion worth of property value, $100,000 of addition is 3 cents on your mill rate, right? It just becomes, what is the level of comfort? And again, you always have to remember, number one, this is just schools, but number two, this is built around averages. And so even though we're thinking very precisely around trying to manage to that no impact, I can't stress enough, this is built on averages and everybody's going to be unique. You know, Andy's point earlier, I think, needs to be stressed that every single year the cards get reshuffled in terms of who's paying you what portion of your property tax levy. Because Fitchburg grew, this one didn't grow as much. Fitchburg, you give us more money, right? And that's probably appropriate, and that's why the state equalizes valuations, because they're growing. They have new construction. They can support it without having to put it on the backs of current property tax payers. So I know that's a lot of info, but I mean, you certainly can go beyond that. We were just trying to be responsive to what we felt was the, you know, the conversation that we heard was, you know, give us something that we can wrap our brains around that has some analysis behind it that can help us understand what the impact might be of our decision.
Any other additional? Troy, go ahead.
Sorry, can I? So Heather, I think you mentioned a 2+ option, and as I was thinking about this, I was really leaning towards that as well, and I was kind of waffling between this straight strategy 2 or trying to go a little bit higher. And I think, I mean, the reason to go higher would be to try and minimize or eliminate the need to go to an override next year, right? But it seems like we still have a whole lot of uncertainty in what's going to happen next year. So it would be difficult to try and predict what that number would need to be to eliminate an override. And so I guess that's what brings me back to being at the strategy 2 or closer to the strategy 2. And I don't know if others have thoughts
Yeah,
on that.
I think, you know, this is a step into a strategy with a lot of unknowns, and we still have to be very mindful of the environment and everyone that lives in the Oregon School District. And so, you know, when I throw out 340, that's a median. That doesn't mean that's an average. And so we have a lot of families that are still struggling in our district now. So I think this takes us a step of doing what we need to do in terms of a long term, but I don't want our eyes to be bigger than our stomach. And that's you know, that's just my personal thought. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think minimizing the impact, leveling the impact is I think is important. I'm not looking for a savings, but I'm not looking for an increase either. I think there are things that we need to do to meet the inflationary impact that we are experiencing or feel we're going to experience, but I don't think we need to add to the inflationary impact. And I think going beyond 2 does that. I think, you know, where everybody is going to pay more, that's adding to the inflationary impact for everybody. So I'm solidly in number 2 for that reason.
All right, any additional discussion? I will entertain a motion if anyone would like to put one on the floor.
I'll make a motion to approve levy strategy number 2 as outlined in the board packet. I'm going to add to that, though, and I'm going to say with an estimated 1.3 to 1.4 million debt defeasement. And I'm just adding that to give administration a little bit more flexibility, being that the target was 1.35, gives some boundaries in that number, because I know there's a little bit of uncertainty in some of the calculations, so that's my rationale.
Is there a second to that motion? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Andy, anything further?
No, I should be able to tell you all the numbers on Friday, so.
All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Dr. Lakuda? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for your time and coming here again. And thank you for the great discussion. Really good questions, everyone. Appreciate your time and thoughtfulness about this. Okay, moving on to action item C2, policies 911 and 912, use of facilities. That is coming from Policy Committee, so I will turn it over to Anna as Chair of Policy.
Thank you. We did meet in September and made recommendations on policies 911 and 912, which is really focused on the use of facilities. What I'll point out in this situation is that the 911 policy, the language in that is really covered in 912. And so the plan coming forth from policy is to just eliminate 911 and have all of the facility use information covered in 912. So that is why both of these are before us this evening. In 912, there were some very, I would call them fairly minor modifications that really brought in some of the youth task force recommendations that came out of that 2018 study that was done, and kind of streamlined some of the language in there. And I'm going to turn it over to Gina just to make sure I'm not missing something that we discussed in that 912 policy to bring to the attention. Oh, before we do that though, one other thing I want to point out is that oftentimes in these policies, there's two things going on. First is the beginning of the policy is the board approved policy. And then there's a second section which refers to the guidelines. And I just want to make it very clear that our board has purview of the policy that is in front of or before the facility use guidelines. Any changes within the guidelines, that's the administrative portion of this policy, which really focuses on how this is going to be implemented by the administration and by school staff. So I want to make that very clear that that is sort of important distinction, is that we are acting on this policy 912 up through 912.11b. And then beyond that are the guidelines that we do not as a board take action on. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Okay, Gina, is there something else I missed on 912 that we should be discussing?
No, that's perfect. The only thing that I would add is that we did add the language in the policy to reflect the updated youth task force work that was done in 2017. And then in the guidelines, I did receive feedback prior to tonight's meeting that I do have a typo in in the guidelines, so I will correct that. And also receive feedback that rather than list the holidays, that we should just talk that facilities could be closed. Because holidays can be subject to change, and we do have closures in addition, like if there's inclement weather and things like that. So I will certainly make those updates as well.
Great. Are there any questions regarding policies?
Let's go ahead and put why don't you make a recommendation from policy to put the motion on the floor, and then we'll do that.
So on behalf of, or I'll make the motion that we would remove policy 911 and adopt the revised 912 facility use policies as included in our packet this evening.
Great, so as a recommendation from policy, it does not need a second. So I will open the floor to discussion. Any comments or questions? Troy, go ahead.
So I think my only question is around 91209A. We refer to Oregon Youth Sports Consortium, and I participated in the Youth Sports Task Force, but I guess I am unfamiliar with how the Oregon Youth Sports Consortium is defined in any policies that the district has. So I'm trying to get at the statement of will actively participate in the sports consortium. I mean, what does that really mean?
I can comment on it if you want. Mike, you may want to comment too, but Mike and I co-chaired that, and so there were 3 recommendations from that paper that came before the board that the board acted on and approved. And so they were recommendations that were approved, and so that was formed and that actually happened, but then COVID has kind of gotten in the way. So I think what we're asking through this policy is that if organizations that are Oregon youth sports organizations would like to use our facilities, they need to participate in that, which was a recommendation voted on by the board. Does that answer your question or no?
It does. I guess I'm just looking forward. Is that consortium intended to continue? I mean, will other recommendations come up? And okay.
Yes, so that consortium will continue with the new athletic director, and we will get reports. And part of why this also was put in there, because that report from that body really pointed to that sports are educationally based and they should be following developmental guidelines based on age, and that was based in research. And so I think that was the thought process behind getting this in here, that we want to make sure that if organizations are using our facilities, which we want them to do, that we really want to have their activities be in the best interest of our students.
Perfect.
And the Oregon School District having those be in our facilities. We are an education-based institution, and we have the authority to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Krista.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I looked through the policy and I didn't really see that it was addressed, and maybe I'm just missing it. But I know that former students come back from college during holiday break and have an interest in using the weight room. It's just a specific example. I'm just wondering, is that addressed in here and I missed it? Or is that not something we allow for?
So we had plans about how to have access to our weight room prior to COVID. And so again, that's one of those things that we have started to rework on. Our big concerns are supervision, because it is our facility. So should people get hurt, we want to do everything that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen and it's properly supervised. In addition, when we had the referendum, one of the points that came back from the community is that they didn't want our weight room to be like a competition with other facilities in the community. So we're trying to balance that along with knowing that, we are a public facility. And it is a very busy place, as you can imagine, and want to make sure, as with all of our facilities, that our students have primary use, and we have that hierarchy. So I know that Mr. Pliner and Mr. Carr were working on a plan to have the weight room supervised, so that we could have access to that in a manner that's just safer, and guidelines around that. So I anticipate it'll be a separate document that would then be incorporated into the guidelines. For example, like we really want people to use a buddy system so they're not working out alone. We had additional cameras put in for security reasons and safety reasons, and now we're working on the supervision piece. But as you can imagine, staffing is a challenge.
And so any change with specific to that issue, and I'm just using that as an example, would fall in the guidelines, not in the policy.
Yes, if there were guidelines around that use, we would add them to the guideline part.
Okay.
For specifics.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Great question, Tim. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0.
All right. Yes, in our September meeting, we also discussed Policy 152, Public Records. And again, I will mention that the majority of what our board is acting on tonight is actually only through 152.07 of this policy document, because beyond 152.07 are the Public Records Administrative Guidelines. So the majority of the changes that are represented in the packet this evening are really cleaning up the administrative guidelines of how that is going to be implemented. And so what I would like to do is actually have Gina step through some of those or be available to answer questions, because it's a little more complicated than the facility use policy. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
So,
Gina, let's have you do that.
Gina, could you quick step through?
Thank you. So in terms of what the policy committee was recommending to the board tonight for changes, it would be the change in 15201. And that was recommended by the policy committee that we just provide a link to the law itself. Because this is a highly regulated area of law in our state. And it changes quite frequently. So if we have the link to the statute, then we have it updated for ease of public use. And then that we're asking that instead of posting it in our schools, that we just post it in the district office and then publish it annually, because people we found don't come into the schools looking for the policy. They either contact us or they look on the website for it, or they call district office if they want a hard copy of it. But in terms of the guidelines, what my practice has been, and we talked about this at policy, is that even though the guidelines are operational and it really tells the public how we carry out the board policies, that if we have guidelines that we think are of particular interest to the public, that we do want to bring them to you so that you're informed about them and can give feedback as well. Facility use public records are of great interest to our community, as you can imagine. And this was on my list really starting probably at least 3 years ago, just to make it easier. This is my 10th year. And when I started, I would say we had maybe one public records law request a year. Katie's nodding. And then we might started to get maybe one a quarter because vendors are interested in our pricing. And so we would really get requests from vendors. And that's something that Cara and Andy would help with. We get them quarterly to see what we're paying for supplies and things like that. And those take us a couple of minutes to respond to. And so I would say really in the last 3 or 4 years, we've started to have more and more requests. And so one of my goals was really to make it easier to understand in terms of the process of how to request information and provide information. And so I think it is fantastic that our public is making requests and wants to see what we're doing. And so I wanted that to be an easier process for people to understand. So try to make it user friendly. On the other side of that is that we've had a practice, and you'll see this in the policy, that we are able to charge fees. And this is regulated under the law about what we can charge. And our fee schedule mirrors the Wisconsin Department of Justice fee schedule, which is the organization charged with enforcing the public records law. So my view has been if they're the body in charge of enforcing the law and we mirror their fee schedule, that should be compliant with the law. So I feel very safe in mirroring their fee schedule. But because we had so few and they were mainly, a couple of minutes, send an email, we haven't been charging. And so that has changed. So we've always had the discretion to charge under the policy and the guidelines themselves, but we haven't had a practice of charging unless we had to produce material. So for example, a cassette tape, a DVD, then we would charge for that supply. And so I wanted to bring it to the policy committee's attention that since we've had more, that our costs in responding to those requests have increased. And so what we have been talking about is since we are, stewards of taxpayer money, do we start to charge, as has been allowed for at least a decade by our policy. And so we talked about that. And so I'm working on, I would say in the last 2 years, we've had dozens of requests. We've gone through reams of paper. The vast amount of time really has been for our IT staff to locate records, because we always ask people to search for them, but I want to make sure we're comprehensive. And so sort of having IT search them is that safeguard to make sure we found all of the records that were requested. So that takes a significant amount of their time. As well as the way our software works is that we do print so that we can redact. Now, we're not able by law to charge for redaction, and that is where another bulk of the time comes in. But we are able to recoup those locating fee costs at a very reduced rate. We can only charge the lowest rate of our lowest staff person. And we are able to charge for the paper costs as well as mailing. But we try to keep those costs down both for us and the public, because we always offer the option of emailing if it's small enough. or to pick up at district office. And also Ms. Heights has been very generous in dropping requests off on people's porches during COVID so that people did not have to come into the district if they weren't comfortable with that. So we had a long discussion at policy committee, and I don't know if you want to recap where we landed.
No, I think that was a great explanation of our discussion, and where we did land is that we do feel that we want to at least recoup the cost of what our resources are in filling these. We're not making money. This is entirely just to recoup the time and materials that are being spent for those open records, and that we would only charge if we estimate the fee to be greater than $10, because under that, seems like the time and materials involved in that would be a non-issue for our district to handle, but beyond that, then we would start to charge for that. And then additionally, we included some language that would still offer some discretion on charging from the standpoint of we don't want that to be a barrier to the public as it relates to a public request for records. So if there's somebody who is presented with financial hardship and can demonstrate such, as whether it's being on free or reduced lunch or some other documentation, that we could waive those fees so that does not become a barrier for the public. And so with that, I would, I guess, make a motion on behalf of the policy committee to recommend approval of policy 152, public records, as presented to you in your packet this evening. And that's it.
Okay, we have a recommendation in form of a motion from policy. Does not require a second. Is there any discussion?
I did have one actually question I wanted to ask. So in talking about the formatting of this document, if we look at like 912 that we just adopted, after the policy part and before the facility use guidelines, we put the resources and the revision dates. To me, that's a really nice visual to separate what is policy enacted on by the board and what is a guideline. So I might recommend shifting the resources and revision date to be right after 152.07 to provide that distinction between the policy and the guidelines. So I would recommend that format change.
No, that's a great suggestion. And just to remind the board, we have hired a company through the School Board Association to help us redo our policies on our website so that they are easier to navigate. And so our hope with that is we will have like the policy and then the guideline under it so that it's clear which is which. But for now, I think that's a great suggestion, and I will certainly make that.
Great, thanks, Anna. Any questions or comments from anyone? Go ahead, Tim.
The fee schedule is part of the policy or part of the guidelines?
It's part of the guidelines.
Okay. And just lost my train of thought on the policy. Check with somebody else, come back to me. Sorry.
Any other comments or questions? Troy, go ahead.
I have one probably for Gina. I can't help myself but getting into the operations of this a little bit. There's a couple of things that kind of just raised a question here. We, like the location fees, we would charge if we estimate it's going to cost us more than $50 to locate that record based on $20 per hour. I mean, in practice, if someone comes to us and they make a very broad request, I don't know what an example is, but, vendor records for the last 3 years, and you determine that that's going to take more than $50, it's going to be a lot of effort, and that person is, maybe economically disadvantaged or doesn't want to pay that. Is there discussion that occurs to get them the information that they need without needing to go through that level of effort, or do you always just default to fulfilling that request? I don't know if I explained that very well, but
You have.
Well,
I think I understand your question. So it's really twofold. So one is that, let's say someone asked, so if someone makes a very, what I determine to be a very broad request, is that we can object that it's too broad. So that isn't, the law allows us to do that. That isn't my first step, because my first step is to work with the person. So I do contact the requester and explain why it would generate a lot of records and potentially be too many records to be legally appropriate. And so we do ask for them if they would like to narrow it and talk that through. So there's always an opportunity to reduce costs. At some point, it becomes a balance. I'd say 99% of the time, the person is happy to work with us and narrow that down. But they certainly don't have to tell us exactly what they're looking for, right? So it just is that balance of, do they want to pay a little bit more? Do they want to try to narrow it? Or is at some point that we just feel we can't really honor the request the way it's asked? And then we advise them of their legal rights for next steps. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. There have been other cases in other districts that have.
Sure.
But we always try to work with the person to try to minimize those costs and to make sure that we give them the records that they are interested in.
Right,
Because, and the law is very explicit that there doesn't have to be magic words per se to make a request. But encourages, the Attorney General's office encourages us to work with the requester to help them find what they need, because they may not know the right phrase. Or, you know, we have a lot of acronyms in terms that we work with in education. So we always try to reach out and work with them.
Yeah, great. That's helpful because, yeah, I think we want them to get the information that they need, but spare them the extra cost, spare us extra effort that doesn't pertain to the information that they're really looking for. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuda? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Thank you, Anna, for your work in policy. Oops. Moving on to D, discussion items. We'll go to committee reports. Back to Anna. Anything else, Anna?
Nope, just another, I guess, reminder, our next meeting is Wednesday, October 20th at 6 p.m. It will be held virtually through Google Meets, so hope to see you there.
Great, thank you. Vision steering, Troy.
Yeah, we met last week. We had 2 agenda items. Number 1 was Portrait of a Graduate, so we continued our work on developing that. And next steps on that, we're moving that forward to get some more feedback from both the administrative team and then looking forward to getting another round of community input on that. The second agenda item was the recreational space study that we began talking about and just began that conversation. And Leslie and I will be making the next steps on that. So,
Great, thank you. C, Worth Woods, Tim.
We actually had a meeting before this one where we were able to provide the charge to our 3 subcommittees in developing that strategic plan. Those 3 subcommittees, the facilities subcommittee, the forest subcommittee, and the instructional subcommittee, a new subcommittee that we added during this meeting time. The expectation is to bring back a plan from each of those for our December 13th meeting, to be brought with a recommendation in our January meetings.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank the committee chairs, Tim, Anna, and Troy. It's a lot of extra work, and appreciate, you know, we kind of had to take a little break from committees during COVID, but now they're back swinging, and you guys are doing a great job leading, so thank you very much. All right, E, information items. Dr. Bergstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We'll start off with the visioning and strategic planning component. Oh, got it right here. There we go. Everybody should be pretty familiar with the graphic that's here, and a big portion of our focus for the year has been on the development of the decision-making framework, in addition to the work that's been happening on Portrait of a Graduate. So we have discussed, as a vision committee, the decision-making framework and piloting it for the next couple of months to make sure that it is really helping us refine our thinking related to the decisions that need to be made at multiple levels in the organization. And then related to Portrait of a Graduate, we're still in the input phase. And I'll talk about the next steps here that Troy just referred to. And that is we're continuing to compile the feedback. We have leadership teams and the OEA Executive Committee who are giving feedback this month. We'll be bringing that into the fold and then sharing the updated draft with the focus group participants. We're very appreciative of the time they spent, and we want them to have an understanding as to how far the work has progressed and the actual result of the input that they gave just a few short months ago. And then we'll be sharing with the draft with families and students and staff in the community through a series of video messages that put the Portrait of a Graduate into context, and then seeking feedback based on the information that we're sharing with them. So we're very excited to get that process moving forward, because we already know our mission, we know our values, and Portrait of a Graduate is really going to be about the creation of our vision. And so it's an important part of the entire strategic plan. Then we'll move to teaching and learning. So does anyone have any questions they want to ask on the first part before we move forward? All right, then John Tanner's coming up. And he's going to talk a little bit about what are the big rocks for teaching and learning this year. Oh, sorry.
There we go. It's weird. All right. Moving forward for this year, we've started, slow, developing a lot of the routines that we've had for the year that we were kind of out of practice with last year. We've started to increase student stamina, and a lot of that has been part of the social emotional learning work that we've done and continue to do, because we know how important that is to get kids used to what it's like to be back in school full 5 days a week. Just from a personal anecdote, I know that my 2 high school sons were like, man, this 5 days a week is really hard. And it was kind of funny too, because one of them commented, I was working all summer 5 days a week, and somehow this seems like harder. Like, well, yeah, because, you're moving from place to place and everything. So that's been kind of a common thing, but we've been sort of slowly getting students up to speed, doing the routines, things like that. And so now as we're continuing to offer that support, continuing to integrate social emotional learning into everything we're doing, and trying to provide that support to move kids ahead. But we're also not wanting to just stay there. Like, obviously we want to develop the stamina so that we can engage in the learning that we need to for this year. Some of the big things that we are moving forward with this year in learning and student achievement, one big one, well, not one, it's actually multiple, but we kind of, in the last year and a half, there were some things we had planned to do and put on hold due to COVID. One of them was curriculum adoption and curriculum revision. There are new standards in several areas. DPI did not necessarily stop doing their curriculum revisions. So we are doing, Darcy Krieger is leading up the review of social studies from K-12, which started way back in June, is continuing throughout the year in a partnership with CISA 2 and some great experts there that are helping with that. And Kim White is also leading, with the help of some CISA folks, an adoption or a review of the K-12 English Language Arts standards. They did a revision that has some cross-cutting concepts about equity, more representation in literature, and just more of a focus on some of the equitable practices and how that works in literature mainly. There's also, I'll actually skip down to the third bullet point, because another thing that Kim has been working on is providing foundational literacy skills training for, and we're starting that with K2 teachers. For those who don't know what that means, it's, well, it's more than just phonics, but it's phonemic awareness, phonics. If you've heard of the science of reading, that's what it is. It's moving sort of the pendulum swinging away from whole language. We've been doing balanced literacy And there's a significant amount of research on the need for systemic and intentional foundational skills training. So we're looking at incorporating that more. And so we're not doing anything with our curriculum. We have a curriculum that we've adopted for more than several years, quite a few years ago, that really brought everybody together doing the same thing every year. So that guaranteed and viable curriculum, which is super important. And what we are doing now is we're providing some training for K-2 teachers, because like myself as an elementary ed major at Madison, and we've kind of surveyed new teachers, and most of this is not getting taught in teacher education programs. So there's a lot of, some of it's new information, not all of it is new, but it hasn't been taught, and so we're kind of taking that on. So we are doing a lot of that training, especially for K-2 teachers this year with one cohort, and then doing another one next year. And that's a big investment in time, and teachers obviously are very stressed with and stretched with time this year, so we really are focusing it on those who need it the most. And what we're trying to do is provide the knowledge for the teachers so that, combined with the new K-12 ELA standards, we can have a better knowledge base from a lot of people to do a curriculum review in a couple of years. Because we don't want to go through a curriculum review now and then be like, oh man, I wish we had known all this stuff about foundational literacy skills. So we're providing that training now so that we'll be much better equipped to make a really smart, informed decision for curriculum review in like 2 years. So we're doing that, and it has some really good immediate impacts too, with just increasing teacher skills. Back to the second bullet point, we're also doing a curriculum review for grades 6 through 8 in math. That's a big, crucial one this year. Celia Pazwa and I are leading that. She's our K-8 math coordinator. Because right now we have Bridges math from K-5. We have, this is confusing, CMP math in grades 6 through 8 and CPM math in grades 9 through 12. And CMP has been kind of sold to different companies, and it kind of seems like it's not getting the attention that it needs. Whereas Bridges, especially during COVID, they released all sorts of materials. They're like, hey, here's all these electronic resources we created for you. Here are the unit pre-assessments that you can use. Here are the essential standards in every unit, because if you recall, we did a lot of work on saying we're going to focus on the essential standards because we have just not as much instructional time. They did all that, which was great. CPM had a huge challenge also. The high school courses are all CPM, and it's very interactive and very group work oriented, which is really hard virtually. But they released a lot of resources that said, here's how to do it. They had free professional development during the year that said, hey, here are a bunch of electronic versions of our things, and here's how to do a CPM approach in a virtual format. CMP said it was radio silence. So we felt really bad for the teachers who had this, but then we kind of reached out, and we're like, okay, this is not real great. So we are doing a curriculum review this year with basically and for those grade levels, because we want to provide our teachers with something where they don't have to like redo all the work. CMP wasn't updated for the new math standards that came out, and so it no longer fully aligns, and so the teachers have had to do a bunch of work to like customize it to meet the new standards. So this year, that's like it's a big job, and it's kind of an urgent job at this point too, because we really want to make sure we're providing teachers with the tools, the best tools possible to use. And then the fourth bullet point, that's a big one, which is sort of all-encompassing, is using data to guide instruction and to evaluate our programs long-term. So we're trying not to overload with assessments, and that is sometimes difficult because there's just so many things we can assess. But we're trying to be like, okay, we need to focus on like the real core. I mean, you know, there's a million things you can teach also. So what we're trying to do is to say, okay, the most important assessments are the ones that the teacher can use immediately to provide better instruction for students. So those aren't necessarily like the big things, like you know, like the forward test that we take for the state every year. We take it in the spring. That doesn't really provide a lot of good information for teachers to teach for that year. It does provide us some things for identifying target groups and looking at long-term like system data. So we're trying to figure out the best way to do all those, and especially in this year when there's just, we know that students may be behind, and we want to make sure that we're meeting every student where they're at. So we're looking at how do we use data, how do we use it this year, how do we use it long term, because we don't want to say, oh, let's just not collect any data, because like as we're looking at equity and trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all learners, we know we have opportunity gaps for students, and we've identified some areas where we think we can make some changes, like this foundational literacy skills training at the elementary levels, which should have a really good impact later on, like middle school and high school, to try to close some of these opportunity gaps we see. But we won't necessarily know that if we don't have some sort of longitudinal, regular data collection process. So that's one of the things we're trying to do is come up with consistent, planned ways to say, hey, if we make this change now, how are we going to know if we've met some of our equity goals, close some opportunity gaps, and just how effective are our programs long term? So that's it's not a terribly well structured problem, but it is kind of an issue because we don't want to be 5 years down the road and say, hey, did that work? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I wish we'd been collecting data all this time. So that's something that we're anticipating for the future that we're going to need, and we're trying to make sure that we're doing that thoughtfully and with the right amount of emphasis given the situation we're in right now, because we do know that teachers need the data to do their instruction day to day. That's the most important thing for them. So it's finding that balance. So I think those are kind of the big things that we're focusing on this year. Like, as I said, the big rocks that we wanted to make sure we get in amongst all the other things we're doing. What questions do you have for me about any of that?
Does anyone have any questions for John? Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you for running us through that. I just had two quick questions. You had mentioned some of the updates in the curriculum for the English language arts, but I was just curious if you could share an example or two on the social studies side, or is that all the same under that bucket?
They're not all the same, but well, the big emphasis in both of them is looking at diverse perspectives and global perspectives. So a lot of it is looking at representation, shifting from a very Eurocentric point of view, and making sure that we're looking at, say, history. And I mean, a lot of it is sort of the history area, looking at that from maybe not the perspective we've always had. That seems to be very kind of Eurocentric. So those would be kind of the big ones for social studies. There's also a lot more about critical thinking, looking at diverse topics and having a structured way to analyze those, which is not to say that you just throw out a controversial topic and say, hey, let's debate it. In fact, it's more about saying, let's practice the skills of taking different perspectives on even a non-controversial topic so that we develop the ability to have a respectful dialogue on opposing viewpoints of something before we actually talk about anything that's like kind of a hot topic, so that we have those skills when we do come up to a hot topic. So there's a lot of that in social studies. And ELA, a lot of it is sort of the representation and equity in that. So that's, that's one of the focus areas from DPI that's been pretty strong over the last couple of years, and we're seeing it now in the adoption of the standards, because it's a multi-year process for them. So some of these things came out actually like a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we were just about to start in on the social studies, and COVID hit, so we kind of put the pause on that. So
thank you for that. I'm supportive of that. My follow-up question would be, we've talked about how we might bring parents along and how we might share out that information. So that might not be the question for you, but I would just be curious, as we are adapting this, how we might be communicating with families and community around that. I don't know if that's you or not.
Yeah, it sure could be. Some of the things, usually the way that we communicate this isn't through a big it's more at the school level and even the teacher level to talk about like, here's what I teach, because that seems to be where you get the most traction with parents. Because like I could send out an email and people are like, who's this guy and why do I care? But if you have a teacher who's talking about this is what we're learning, or even at the school level and say, because we have like, dinner and a book nights. We're not doing the dinner part together so much lately, but we have, and we have like math engagement nights and things like that where we invite parents in. That's at the elementary level. We don't do a lot of dinner and a book at the high school level, I don't think, but we could try. I don't know. It might be interesting to see who would show up. But we do have the Equity Book Club. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. But there's no food. Anyway.
I think to Heather's point, though, too, is we talk a lot about the why, the why we're doing this. And I think the thing that's so interesting now is that standards in curriculum and subjects are bringing in SEL and equity work where it was sort of separate before, and now it's really being integrated nationally. And some people sometimes misrepresent that we're telling kids how to think or what to think, and really we're just getting them to think. We're not telling them what to think. We're saying develop skills about how to critically analyze things. And so this is exciting to me, but to your point, Heather, I think it is. It's the why and what it means, right?
I think even your summary of just kind of representation and Eurocentric is super helpful, and so I think parents would appreciate not just this is what I'm teaching, which is appreciated, but the even understanding the shift. I guess I'm speaking for myself here, would be really helpful to know. And I fully get it at the school level. I'm not looking for an email from you, although I would read it. But yeah, I think it would be really helpful to understand that the shift and the why and how it's being embedded in regular curriculum.
The other really cool point that you made, and it's funny because you have conversations, is the whole stamina piece. And I think as adults, we are recognizing it too in ourselves in terms of work. And we've gone, from a slower time, 0 to 60. And so I think that's also important too, that parents understand that lots of kids are going through it or recognize it in themselves. So this point of kids and parents bringing each other along, that we're all dealing with that stamina piece, like, wow, here we go again. So I appreciate you really bringing that up because it is a real thing.
And thanks for the suggestion about communicating to parents the why behind it. That's something we'll have to look into and find a good way to do that.
Anna? Mary?
Sure. So the grades 6 through 8 math, I think you had said hopefully evaluate and shift within 2 years? Is that right?
Oh yeah, no, that should be pretty quick actually. And one really cool thing actually that's happened, if you recall back in, gosh, I want to say it was August, late July or early August, the board approved funding for a 1-year math interventionist position, and you'll be happy to know that we've actually done that. We've hired that. We actually hired one of our internal teachers who has a lot of math expertise to do that, and so she is actually working with. We assigned her to the middle school and RCI, and the person who was at RCI is being shifted down to the elementaries to provide more support for the students who need more at the elementary. But the point here is that she's been working with like the grades 6 through 8 teachers. And so we're providing like an extra level of support to say, okay, let's use some screeners, for your students to find out exactly what they need. So we're providing sort of because middle school hasn't had a math interventionist position in like 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. So we have a person there actually to really help with that. So we're hoping to make a decision this year and put in a new curriculum that is, like for next year, because I really think we need it. It seems, yeah. I mean, and maybe some publisher from the existing curriculum will be like, oh yeah, by the way, we've been waiting. Here's this great thing that we have, and we'll just keep using that. That doesn't seem where we're at now, but that's not like a 2 to 3 year thing. That's like, hey, we need this next year, or we're going to be spinning our wheels constantly updating something that isn't really supported by the vendor.
That was my question. I didn't want to have our 6 through 8 going through
right.
inferior math?
Yeah, that's a good question, because normally when we do a curriculum adoption, it is like a multi-year process, because we usually like establish all the criteria, take a look at the state standards, identify multiple options, and then go through like a pilot year. Like that's what, when Leslie led through Bridges adoption, it was like we had like our top 3 and we had different teachers pilot it in different schools and grade levels and then came together based on that experience. I don't anticipate spending 2 to 3 years doing this for grades 6 through 8. So we hope to have something by the end of this year that'll be a fairly seamless transition right in. And the additional support of that math interventionist, I think, will really help. Not only help them support this year, but also help look toward what can be better in a new curriculum next year that's updated.
Great. Thank you very much, John. We always
Thank you.
appreciate you chatting with us and sharing what's happening in teaching and learning. And thank you to Darcy as well. All right, back to you, Dr. Bergstrom.
All right. I just want to wrap up John's great comments. I hope everybody noticed how our professional learning is tied to what we want to be able to accomplish for our kids. What we're doing in the classroom and the professional learning to support it has to go hand in hand, right? And the other piece is, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but the idea of teaching social emotional learning skills to our students, ensuring that curriculum is inclusive and helping to create a sense of belonging. Those aren't separate things. Those are the things we do to create a readiness for learning that allows students to achieve their potential academically. So it's not something extra, it's the foundation of what we do, and I just wanted to make sure I said it yet again. So moving on to the superintendent's report, because there are some wonderful things happening that are really great to highlight. So congratulations to Allison Langto, who was invited to sing the national anthem and America the Beautiful at the POW MIA Empty Chair Dedication Ceremony at the Capitol Rotunda. Governor Evers and many other state and national dignitaries attended the event. So congratulations, Allison. That was a bright spot one day when we got that information. And Heartstrings, this is the second year now. We have had the Music Therapy Informed program that brings live interactive presentations by some of Madison Symphony Orchestra's best players to school. And Heartstrings had a performance at OHS last week that included several of our staff members. So that's a pretty cool thing. And also congratulations to the Wisconsin State Music Association State Honors. You see all of our students there who received honors in this competition. The competition's been happening since 1967, and it provides musically accomplished students with an opportunity to rehearse and perform with the nation's finest conductors in a professional, highly disciplined setting. They are selected through a rigorous audition process. They're challenged to perform at their best musically throughout the short rehearsal period, which culminates in a performance in October, in conjunction with the Wisconsin State Music Conference held at the end of October. So congratulations to all of our students who are a part of this honor. That is a lengthy list. So you can see how many really amazing musicians we have in this district. And then we'll get to homecoming. And honestly, what a week. And our students really deserved every ounce of fun they squeezed out of that week. And it was wonderful to see. Our student council members helped to create all these fun Spirit Week activities and promote them. And many thanks to our student council members for doing that. And then, oh, we got all these parade pictures coming. The parade was a wonderful experience. And you can just see from the pictures here, the fun, right? Kids needed to be able to have this wonderful, fun experience and laugh with one another and enjoy being together as a community. And you can even see how our values are integrated into the parade in multiple ways too, right? Everything that we do is reflecting what we believe to be important. And I know many people were concerned about the gentleman who fell on the parade route. I just want to make sure everybody knows that he's okay. So if you heard about that, he's okay. That's a good thing. It was a wonderful afternoon, and who knew it would be sunny? Everybody was expecting rain. Our principals, they went out and bought tarps for the kids to sit on, and it was dry and sunny all day long. And then we got to go to the game on Friday night, and that was another wonderful experience. I was wondering if we were meeting capacity limits in the stands because there were so many people who were there. And it was outside and it was lovely and a great experience. And you know what else was outside and lovely? And that is the dance on Saturday night. 775 tickets sold to this dance.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
I mean, that's significantly more than other dances. And boy, did they have fun. The music had kids dancing from the time they walked in until the time they left. It was like kind of wedding reception music, right? They were doing the Dougie and jump and all that kind of stuff that just, cracked us all up. But the kids were laughing and having fun for 3 solid hours. And having it outside, I think, gave us that extra level of safety and probably meant that a lot more kids were able to come because they felt like it was an okay thing to do. So homecoming was a wonderful celebration, and we're very grateful to everybody because it's extraordinarily stressful for the people at the elementary schools to get all the little ones together and organize for the parade. And they do it because they love to see the kids so happy. And then at the high school level, we had 2 new homecoming advisors, Anna Gavin and Laura Keel. First year ever, and this is what we get. That's pretty wonderful. As is the devotion of all of the staff members who were supervising on Saturday night. So thanks to the administrative team and all the other supervisors, and it was a good thing. And that's it for a superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. It's really cool to see. When I talked to Laura, and she told me that we had sold that many tickets. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Jim, congratulations on building that community at the high school. That's great. It's wonderful. Yeah. And it was funny. I asked my son, who actually went to the dance, I said, well, did you dance? He's like, no, Mom, we don't dance, we jump. I was like, okay, sorry. So evidently they jump now, right?
They do.
That's what you said.
They do.
All right. That concludes our section E. Moving on to F, future agenda. We do have some things coming up. We do have another report coming from Andy with the budget. It will be a big meeting. And then if you have anything else that you'd like to see on the agenda, please do let us know. And then checkout before we go into closed session. I will start with you, Anna. Anything? Nothing. Tim?
I just really want to hand it to everyone who pulled off such an awesome Spirit Week, an awesome homecoming. You could just feel it bubbling up in the community, and I just think that is so awesome. So thank you.
Mary?
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I know that the feedback that I have heard on the parade, on the homecoming dance was just spectacular. A lot of people had a lot of fun. I know my daughter enjoyed the dance and the parade, and so just kudos to the administrative team, for everyone involved, for the student council members who helped put the dance together. Just well done.
Heather? Troy?
I'll just jump on the bandwagon, reiterating homecoming week, and I'll just share my daughter came home and she said, I don't think I can wait. And I really wish there was a winter dance because I don't think I can wait until spring for prom. So it was just a great event, and kudos to all the teachers, and especially for the parade. I know that's a really challenging event for teachers to get students there safely and watch them be safe during the parade. And it was well worth it. I think everybody really had a great time. So thank you.
Great. I just have one thing. I don't know if many people are aware, but there is a new program that just debuted before the pandemic, and it's called the Be a Champion Mentor Program. It's a partnership between the Oregon School District and Friends of Oregon School District, and it started with 4th graders because, you know, we have some transitions in this district. We go from 4th to 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th, and so kind of a brainchild of Amy Miller and Colleen Schell and Friends of Oregon School District. And so Tim is a mentor, Leslie is a mentor, Jean is a mentor. We have a lot of mentors in this room. We are now up to 35 mentors, but we have 15 kids that need mentors. So if you would like to help a child and just be there for them and play games with them 1 hour a week, we could really use more mentors. So if you have the time, or if you know someone that maybe would be a really good mentor, we do have a 1 hour training that's happening on the 19th or the 20th. So please let us know, because we have kids that really would benefit, and I'm sure Tim could attest to the mentor gets as much out of it as the mentee does. So just wanted to put a shout out for that. So if you know of anyone, or if you're watching and would love to be a mentor, just let us know. So thank you. Okay, we are now take a 2-minute break, and then we'll go into closed session. Thanks, everybody.